Welcome back, everyone, to the Property Journey Podcast, episode 31. And today's topic, Roy, we're going to be talking about renovations and refurbishments. Probably mainly geared towards investment properties, but probably most of the stuff that we'll talk about will also affect people obviously going and buying a house and then doing something very, very similar. So, first thing probably to ask is, where do you start when it comes to if you're thinking about renovating or refurbing a property? Does it start with a plan?
I suppose if you're taking a look at it from a buy-to-let or an investor point of view, not every single house needs to be renovated or refurbed. But if it's something whereby you're maybe buying something new to you, some landlords have a view, right? Well, let's get it all spruced up. And then that's it, effectively, that's the house touched or sorted out for the next 10 years. So probably looking at budget-wise, how much do you want to spend on the house? And the cost of things nowadays are just slowly spiralling out of control. So it's a matter of looking at, what do you want to do? Is it just a matter of, do you want to just give it a paint? Do you want to just change the flooring on it? Or do you want to go the full hog and maybe put in a new bathroom, new kitchen, new fireplace, new boiler? Like, I know some investors, it maybe sounds expensive, but that's it. They buy a house and they immediately, even if it's a wee bit tired and it would rent out easily, they don't care. They'll go in, they'll rip it out and they'll do all that work to it. And then that's it. Simple, no issues, probably for the best part of 10, 15 years.
Is that then so that, as you say, that they don't have those issues? You know what I mean? It's go in, here's what I do, get it all sorted, done and dusted, I'll not have to worry about it, rather than having a kitchen that's maybe 15 years old and kind of going, in a couple of years' time, I'm going to have to rip that out.
Yeah.
And I've just painted it.
It comes down to your strategy. So, for instance, part of my portfolio, I simply have, if I have money, I just want to basically get a return on that quickly, as quick as possible. And simply, if it's a house there, if it is in poor condition or poorer condition, but yet you know that it's still going to rent and it's going to give you a good yield, brilliant, you're getting money from day one. But I know myself that every time that house becomes vacant, that's going to be maybe slightly harder to rent it out. And all I'm doing is putting a sticky plaster on it, knowing rightly that in maybe 5 years, 7 years time, maybe less, because if I have a high turnover of tenants, it's maybe going to take a bit more wear and tear. I know that, no doubt, that in maybe 6-8 years time, I'm going to have to spend 20 grand on a particular house.
Because probably the scenarios, like there's obviously numerous scenarios that you could kind of drum up, and then each one of them is going to probably give a different outcome, So like, say for example, a fairly new-ish house, maybe one that's maybe 20 or 25 years old, maybe already has had the kitchen replaced or whatever. If you're buying that from either an investment side of things, or if you're moving into that property as your home, is it a case of maybe it could be as simple as just carpets need replaced and the walls need painted?
Well, if you're moving into it, it's a slightly different scenario. At the end of the day, you want something that suits your requirements. If you have the budget, it's probably easier just to do it all whenever you buy the house. Hold off getting moved up or moved in. Do that all, and it just gives you that nice fresh feeling, when you're moving in and you can smell the carpets. That's the one thing. There's two things I love about refurbs is the gutting out. So you're ripping everything apart, and then once the house is new carpet and painted, just that smell. So if you're living in it yourself, if it was me, I would just do all that work and do it there and then. Because if you're living in the house, it's really, really difficult, because if you're going to do one room at a time, there's just the hassle of it. There's the dust, there's the mess, the inconvenience of it, and you've trades guys and tradespeople just tramping through your house and your living space. Whereas it's much easier if it's a blank canvas. And oddly enough, trades will probably prefer coming in to an empty house rather than tiptoeing around around your belongings.
Well, that's the thing, you maybe have tables and chairs and you've nowhere really to put them apart from the middle of the floor, and they're having to then, as you say, tiptoe around them and try and squeeze ladders in if they're painting, or trying to get the ceilings and make sure they're not splashing, or whatever it happens to be. And that's where I was kind of then going, is it then, if you're buying the property or before you buy the property, there's a high chance you'll be looking at that, kind of figuring out what's going to need to be done.
Yeah.
Because as you say there, if you move in and then decide to start trying to do these things, especially if it's like an extended renovation, as I would say, where it's like, plaster needs to come off the walls, and walls need to be replastered, that side of things. Yeah. Surely before you buy the house, you'd be kind of having half an idea that some of this might be done.
You should do your homework. It's similar to, I don't know if you've come across anybody over the years who they've talked about, they would love a new car and their vision of a particular car, and they save up just for that car. But then it maybe ends up, it's maybe a big engine and it's quite costly to insure, it's maybe costly to fuel, and then they don't drive it anywhere because they're maybe a bit too tight. It's the same sort of thing. A lot of people buy a house, whether it's to rent out or to live in, and they're working out the figures of just getting the house bought, but they forget about everything else, the stamp duty, the legal fees, the extra works that need to be done on it. So don't always be looking at a budget and buying a house with it. So if you can borrow and put a deposit down, for instance, for whether it's 100,000 or 150,000, and once you buy the house, that's your money all gone. Factor in a bit extra there for doing any works to it.
Because as you've mentioned there, the price of things seem to be just ticking up and ticking up and ticking up. And I know you've done a couple of renovation jobs recently. In terms of price points, I'll not jar you exactly how much it cost, but roughly speaking, for, I don't know what your renovations were, but in terms of pricing side of things, what sort of way are you looking now in terms of pricing points?
It's difficult to say, but probably on average, a typical, I'm just trying to think, like a council estate type house or housing executive house, you're probably looking on average maybe 1,000 to 1,300 for painting, something roughly similar for carpet. You're looking at a new bathroom suite, depending whether it's a full gut out, you could be looking at maybe £5,000. And then the kitchen as well, just depends on the shape, size, the time you put appliances into it. If you're retiling walls and the floors, again, you could be looking into maybe £8,000 for that as well. So it doesn't belong stacking up, whereas that's a lot higher than what it was years ago. And then you have to factor in, the other labour for doing maybe everything else. Bit of a gut out, there's always cleaning to be done, and bit of work outside, hedges and things like that. So if you've got the time and you're doing that yourself, brilliant. But as I always say, that's not how you should be getting into property. You should be doing it so that it's all taken care of for you, full stop. So you have to factor that all in. Because
I'm sitting just counting up as you were saying them figures, and you're probably sitting there in between that 15, 20 grand mark.
Easily. And then that's not even getting into any issues. The likes of if you need a new boiler, you're easily into a couple of grand. And what else? You could sometimes maybe, you always come across the old wood chip wallpaper and you start taking into hacking it off the walls. Awful. And then you're into re-skimming. Maybe you're into its old style doors and architraves. Again, you're into another thousands of pounds. And my view is you can always spruce these things up all you want with like a paint, but at the end of the day, if it's an old door that's 40 years old, it can just drag down the look of a house. Yeah, especially whenever you're looking at photographs and everything's all nice, new, modern. For example, a new kitchen, and then you look at the door and you're thinking, that doesn't work. Because it just looks out of place. But this is kind of where then the figures matter, because if you're spending £100,000 say on the house, which, let's be honest here, the £100,000 is very cheap at the minute. It is, the way things are going. You're struggling to get a house for that sort of money. And it potentially needs to be renovated or updated, and add the extra 20 grand on that. You're now sitting at 120, and if you haven't pre-planned that, and you're sitting going 100,000, I'm sure that'll do.
you know, it's not going to work out for you. And as you say there, if you're going to try and rent that out and not do any of that work, or just put a bit of lacquer paint on, it's not going to maximize the returns for you.
No. Well, from a return point of view, you know, sometimes you look at it for what the rent that you'll get with the house at 100,000 as is, and the rent that you'll get if it's all spruced up by spending that extra 20,000 on it. You know, the figures don't really stack up on that, but really it comes back to the long game. You're looking at it from a point of view, it's a better product, which means it's going to rent far more quickly. You know, it's like any business. You know, you want to be the best, so you want to attract the best, and then from that point of view, just you're getting, you know, as I said, better tenant, hopefully less issues from the tenant. They're going to stay there longer, and then because the house is in good order to start with, the likelihood of needing repairs and replacements over a period of 5 years, generally when you average that out, it is a better return.
Because this, I suppose you've maybe touched on it there. You know, I had thought about the, I was just wondering if it was on my list there, was about the sort of the pricing point. You know, or if you spend 20 grand on a house, you know, is it worthwhile, or kind of what way do you balance that up if you know, in terms of the value of the property? So say, for example, you've bought it for 100,000, you know, and that's maybe in around what the value is, but then you go and spend 20 grand on it. You've technically invested 120,000. Where does that stack up then in terms of the value of the house? Or
generally, oddly enough, it normally stacks up as in what it is. So for instance, if you've bought a house at market value, as in it was on with an estate agent and there's been bidding and it's been secured to you, say for instance at 100,000, and you then spend 20,000, it's probably more than likely only worth 120,000, give or take. There might be a few extra thousand in it. You know, where some people make savings would be maybe they do a lot of the work themselves, so they're not paying out a lot of trades guys, so it's maybe cost them 20,000, but yet it's in real terms it's maybe 125,000, and that's where you can add a wee bit of value to the house. Again, if you can get the house maybe off market, which can be difficult to do, or there isn't much bidding, or it's maybe at a quieter time of year, and you're able to do that work yourself, you are able to add value. Now, if anybody is getting on or getting into property and they'll hear or they'll hear people talking about add value, you know, it's nearly a myth, or it's a trick, because by the time you do all that work, there's very little added value into it, and it's very difficult at that point then to sell, because by the time you factor in stamp duty that you paid to buy the house, which was 5 grand, so the £100,000 actually cost, the £100,000 house actually cost you 105,000. Then you have legal fees of, easy talk's sake, you know, £1,500. You go to sell it, it's going to cost you about £1,500, and then the estate agent maybe 1,500, 2 grand. So you've all that to factor in too, and a lot of people go through that whole process, sell a house to make £5,000-6,000, and you might think, oh well, it's still £5,000 or £6,000, but if you've done all that work and you've put all that effort into it, doesn't really stack up.
Yeah. Because as you say there, the countless hours of, you know, if you're working your full-time job and then doing this in the evenings and then doing it in the weekends, and you know that's maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 hours at the weekend.
It's a long game.
Yeah,
it's a long game.
Then the other flip side then is kind of, you know, so we're talking about just general kind of sprucing up inside, you know, new kitchen or whatever. You know, is there potential options for whenever you're renovating, for example, you're doing maybe extensions, you know, so you're taking a property and it's maybe a 2 or 3 bedroom property and you're putting an extension on and maybe adding 2 extra rooms. Is there options for that then, which again might lead into adding value per se, you know?
Different ball game that altogether, because you're into the fact of architects, planning permission, building control, full-on contractors, you know, because you want that all done quickly and right. The likes of that, yes, if you design it right and you do it right and you don't go crazy on the spending, it can have a big impact. It can add a lot of value to the house. Most people who would do that would be doing it really more for themselves to live in the property, and by the time you get that all done, you live in the house a couple of years and then you go to sell it, you can see a big jump in the value of the house. And the reason probably for that jump is the fact that there is such a time lapse. You know, from you doing it to getting that all done can easily be 2 and 3 years. So yes, you know, by doing that, doing it right, you can make, you could easily add maybe 20 to 40, 50,000 value.
I'm gonna throw something in here because it's something that I've seen recently and I thought it was a great idea. Was terraced houses, row houses, and the person has bought the house beside them,
Right.
and they've knocked it in, and they've essentially taken 2 of the houses on the street and made it into one house.
Yep.
Would that be an easier option than trying to extend, for example, because you've already got it there? Or are you still into planning permission?
You would, yes, you would. Don't hold me to this. I'm not a planner, but I'm just thinking out loud. I possibly need planning permission, yes, because it's a change of use and it's no longer a single dwelling, so it's 2 dwellings. Building control definitely needed, but again, wouldn't be overly complicated as long as it meets regulations. And then practically, it would just come down to how would the house be redesigned to actually suit it. But again, without pricing it, I'm thinking probably would maybe work out more efficient, because you're just knocking down and knocking out walls, as opposed to extensions can be quite tricky. You know, you've tight, awkward spaces to get diggers in, to get workmen in and out, and concrete and blocks and all the materials in and out. So it can get very, very tricky. And a lot of contractors don't like that sort of work then, because it just slows them down. Whereas possibly, yes, if you got the house next door and you got it at good money and all that stacked up, it could work out.
And I'm only saying that just because I was driving down past and I seen a house and I realised there was only one door. And I was kind of going, one door, but there's 2 houses there. And I realised what they've done then was buy the property next door, and they've obviously, I would assume, inside they've knocked it through and then redesigned it then. And I was just sitting thinking then, would that be an easier option? Because then, as you say there, with, say, planning, you know, and you might have neighbours there that will, you know, dispute then kind of you're throwing up another, you know, story or whatever, or you're putting up, extending out the back, and you're maybe blocking a view and they're going to be giving off, you know, and you're into those issues. Whereas if you're buying something that's already there, it's kind of going, well, you're not probably really going to have those issues, because you're not really changing anything other than
exactly
the
it's
inside.
just from a typical person outside looking in, it looks generally like 2 houses, but yet for an extension, as you say, yes, planners are going to be looking at it as if to say, how does it fit in with the other development? So it could be something that just maybe is too large. It could be overlooking a neighbour. It just mightn't look right. And yes, more neighbours could more likely object to it. Right, I'm just going to run down here cost breakdowns then. Is there any areas where people would tend to overspend, where they don't budget for it probably correctly, or they think, oh sure, that there only take a couple of pound to do, you know? Is there any areas where they kind of go, that actually cost more than what I thought it was going to? And anything like that, you can get carried away. It's all about your tastes. So, you know, to give you an example, if you're doing a bathroom, you can have it very basic, which is just simply you've got a couple of tiles around your wash hand basin and a couple of tiles around a shower or what have you, and then you just put lino down. So again, cheap and cheerful, as they say, but practically, you know, is it right? You know, if you have lino, it's just water can run down and run in under the lino. It can mold and just go fungus and not great. Likewise, if not all the showers tiled or sealed or properly, again, you're taking a shortcut, and in the long run, it's going to cost you more money. Kitchen wise, you know, it all depends on the detail. Kitchen companies give you so many options. It can get so costly. You know, are you going for a vinyl door? Are you going for a solid wooden door? Are the soft closed hinges? Is there a wee pelmet along the top of it? Maybe even cut back on the number of cupboards. That all adds up to it. Do you want round cupboards? Do you want, you know, it's kitchens. I can remember whenever I was building, the cost of the kitchen was the exact same price as the entire block work of building the house.
Yeah.
And I can always remember my builder kind of frustrated that there he spent all these weeks standing in the bitter cold of the winter time building the house, and then his view was he looked at the kitchen and thought, well, that's only a few cupboards put together and that's costing the exact same amount of money. But you always think everybody else's job's much easier. But but those things, just, it's all about your taste. You can get carried away easily.
And then that, as you say, whenever you do get carried away, then you kind of go, oh, but sure, it's only an extra 50 quid, or it's only an extra £100, or it's only, and once you then that all begins to add up, then you realise that you're into maybe 2 or 3 grand very, very easily. And I suppose we've kind of touched there on the typical costs in terms of, you know, what your kitchen will cost, what your bathroom will cost. Is it the hidden cost? Whereas, for example, you know, you go in, and especially now, obviously, we regulations changing slightly with the electrical work. Is it those kinds of things where things might need to be rewired, or are they the kind of the hidden cost that you think, I never thought about that?
So the likes of that, so if you're buying a house to rent out, then yes, it has to be up to standards for electrics, and that could be the case whereby years ago wasn't an issue, no problems at all, whereas now it might be the case where you have to change the consumer unit. That could easily be, you know, anything from £500 to £1,200, and that's only the consumer unit alone. Might be the case there has to be other wiring done. You have the smoke alarms at £500. So again, without realising, if you were on a tight budget, there's maybe a couple of £1,000 easily that'll eat into it. Another one as well, which I come across very regularly, is somebody goes to change the heating system. In some older houses, the pipe work for radiators are very, very narrow. So if you want to then put in a new boiler, it isn't able. You know, the pipes are too small to send the water around the system, and then you're completely into a whole new pipe work. So thousands upon thousands to put that.
I was going to say, well, no, the price of copper piping, like, you know. And that, I suppose then there's probably different, you know, things then, as you say, with the, you know, contractors maybe coming in, depending on what your work is or what renovations you're doing, you know. But is there, you know, what would your recommendation be whenever it comes to, if it's a small task, for example, painting? Do you do it yourself, or do you just bring a painter in to get it done and dusted that's going to have it done in maybe 2 days work rather than you spending 4 weekends at it?
All day long, bring in a painter. And I'm sharing this from experience. I've been in property for basically 20 years. When I started out, I thought, yeah, painting's easy, it's simple. And, you know, I would count myself fairly handy, fairly decent. But yet, no doubt, professional coming in, looking at it, they will, you know, they'll not like it.
Rip you to shreds.
You know, and I've come across it over the years, tenants saying, oh, I'll paint the house, and it's a complete nightmare.
Yeah.
You know, there's more to painting than people think, and they're putting paint around the light switches and the skirting boards, and a bad paint job will actually devalue your house. Whereas if you just get it done right, it looks well, and that's simply it. I'll share an example with you. Come across a contractor was doing a self-build, and the client then painted the house himself. So painted the house on brand new plaster, and it just came up very, very poorly. And he ended up the plaster was being blamed for it, and almost got into a whole big court case over it. And it simply come down to the plaster work was becoming damaged because it wasn't being painted properly, because it was fresh plaster.
Yeah. And
the entire house, it ended up costing an extra, I think it was like £5,000 to £8,000 to fix it all, to simply save probably £2,000
on a painter
in the first place.
In terms of your experience, it kind of slightly runs into it, but in terms of your experience, have you had any with, you know, I don't want to say like dodgy contractors, but, you know, there is the term cowboy, you know, contractors as such. Have you had any experience with that, or have you been quite lucky in the sense that you've got people?
Touchwood, I have been very fortunate, simply because most of the times I only ever deal with people that I know. People that I know personally and locally, so that I'm going to be seeing them regularly. I can eyeball them, and they're they're going to be honest. Whereas if somebody is from far away, you don't see them, you know nothing about them, you've got no recommendations about them, then there's a possibility that something could happen. As I say, touch wood, over the years, I've been very fortunate. I've maybe had a couple of painters let me down who've maybe come in and realised it's a bigger job than what they'd initially planned, and they ended up, they just left. But which wasn't too bad. It ended up they didn't need paid or anything like that. But it set me back really more than anything from organising. But touch wood, I haven't had anybody come in, do a bad job, and then need it rectified.
Yeah. No, and that's why I was only touching that, because then does it boil down to, as you said there, about recommendations? Is it worthwhile paying someone local that's been recommended to you because of the work that they've done and the quality of it, rather than going and trying to get someone cheap that has no recommendations, or nothing about them, comes in and ends up you're in the wrong fit?
Northern Ireland, everybody knows everybody. Everybody talks about everybody. If somebody does a good job, people tell nobody. If they do a bad job, they'll tell everybody. So always go with a recommendation, and even at that, maybe get the same contractor, but get a number of recommendations for that person, and then maybe go and look at their work as well, check it out, and get speaking to them personally. That's the best way of doing it. Simply just to come across it or hear about it all the time. People go on to social media, I need a plumber or I need an electrician, and that seems to be the opportunity there for the so-called cowboy builders, if you want to call it, coming in, pricing, taking money, and not actually finishing it. So ask, even if you don't have connections, always ask somebody else, whether it's in work, whether it's at a local community group or sports club or what have you. There's somebody else is going to know, a tradesperson, and go from there.
Right, we'll go quick fire here just with a couple of these last kind of ones. How long does the typical refurb take?
Depends on what you're doing. If it's a full hog, you don't belong losing 6 months nowadays, especially if you don't have a contractor and you're pulling everybody together. Trying to get trades guys back at the minute and getting them finished, they're under pressure, they have a lot of work on, shortage of staff. So don't be thinking that the whole lot can be done in weeks. Expect months.
Yeah. In terms of that renovation side of things, in terms of finance options, what are you looking at? Is it funds that you've maybe got from previous projects? Is it potential loans? Is it, is there different avenues for finance?
If you're refurbing houses and you're driven to build your portfolio, most people will be doing this with either their own money, so their own savings, they've privately borrowed, or what they do is they get maybe one project up and going, get it done, a few months later they're able to maybe remortgage, pull a wee bit of that equity out, and that gives them another loan as such, or a slush fund to use to then move on to the next property.
What's the biggest renovation mistakes you've either made or you've seen be made?
Probably for myself, I'm an optimistic type of person, so I'm always trying to think, that'll be straightforward, that'll be an easy job, that'll only take a day's work, that won't cost too much, and then you realise it's not a day's work, it's a week's work, or it might be a 3-man job for a week's work, and then so it's being too optimistic sometimes.
And the final one then is, how can sort of newer investors coming in learn the ropes without risking too much?
Take as much advice from an experienced investor or investors and listen, because you're not going to go out and start a new sport by just doing it yourself. If you're going to take up golf, you immediately go to your golf club and you book in lessons with the pro. What you're going to learn from that pro in a 10-week training course, it's going to take you years going out in the golf course to figure it out yourself.
And I'm probably just going to add a wee bit, and you might agree and you might not agree. Probably don't go down the route of a refurb straight away.
Yes, go for a very basic one where it's just simply maybe like a paint and carpet. Whereas if you get into the bigger jobs and you don't really know what you're doing and you don't have the contacts, then it can be costly to learn.
Because I suppose then, just on a final point, if you don't have that house rented out, and we're talking on investor side of things here, if you don't have that house rented out, it's not making you any money.
It's
The
costing
longer
you.
the longer it's taken to rent it out, you're essentially losing money.
That's where I learned that in my early years as well. I thought, oh, I'm going to be saving this much. I'll do it myself. I'll do it that, and I'll do it in the evening times and the weekends. And then you realise, for me to paint the house, it was taking me maybe 4 weeks, 5 weeks, doing it in the evenings and the weekends. Whereas if you were organised, a painter would have it done in maybe 4 or 5 days, which means gets the house finished, gets the house rented out, gets that money coming in faster. So it actually, you make more money by paying pros to come in to do it for you.
Yeah. And I think on that note, Roy, then that's us finished up. A couple of wee quick fire ones there at the end. Episode 31, thank you very much, Roy. That was renovation and refurbishment. Any questions that any of our listeners may have, always give us a wee shout.
We look into the details and the back end of these podcasts every week. We can see so many people are listening to them. We're getting loads and loads of questions coming in from our listeners. So don't be afraid, hit subscribe, give us a follow on all the platforms, and help us boost our reach to more and more investors.
Thank you very much, Roy.
Thank you.
We'll leave it there. And thank you, everyone, for listening. See you all in the next episode.